Hello everyone, my name is Alisa Berisha and I'm a master's student in Music and Performing Arts Education in the University of West London. The question at the center of this research is one I think a lot of us in music education will recognize. What do music students actually think is waiting for them on the other side of their degree? Not what they hope, not what they are told, but what they genuinely believe. This presentation shares what 12 students told us and what the evidence says about either those beliefs hold up. Here's where we are going. We'll start with a brief introduction to why this topic matters, then move through the research question and objectives, the methodology including how participants were selected, four key peer-reviewed sources, the results, and finally, conclusions and recommendations. It's a fairly compact journey, so let's get into it. You've probably heard it, or maybe you've said it yourself. What are you going to do with a music degree? This question is asked with curiosity and sometimes with genuine concern. And what makes it such an interesting question for a researcher is that the people best placed to answer it, music students themselves, often aren't given the tools or the information to answer it well. The reality of music careers is that they are rarely straightforward. Graduates tend not to walk into one clear job. They build what researchers call portfolio careers, combining performance work with teaching, freelancing, administrative roles, and sometimes work entirely outside music. That's not a failure of the degree, it's simply the nature of the industry. But if the students don't know what's coming, they can be caught off guard, and that gap between expectation and reality is what this study is about. The central research question is, how do music students in higher education perceive their employability and career prospects? And do these perceptions actually match what graduates experience? From that, six objectives follow. We wanted to understand their confidence in finding work, their awareness of career paths, how they view their institution support, what worries them the most, how student perceptions compare with what the literature tells us about graduate reality, and what institutions could concretely do better. These objectives shaped the survey and the way we interpreted the data. Before we look at the data, I want to flag the four peer-reviewed sources that most directly inform this research. Bennett and Bridgestock 2015 study on the gap between student career expectations and graduate reality. Bennett's 2016 conceptual piece on employability in music education. Lopez, Iniguez, and Bennett 2021 study on a curriculum-embedded career intervention, and Berland, Meller, and Bates 2023 work on what they call employability ecosystem. Each of these will come up in the next four slides. On source number 1, Bennett and Bristock tracked 58 music and dance students from the very beginning of their degrees, then caught up with them 4 years later as graduates. What they found is striking. At the start, most students anticipated performance-focused careers, one clear role, ideally in the area they were training for. By the time they graduated, the picture was completely different. Most were working in portfolio careers, mixing creative and non-creative work, often in roles they hadn't anticipated when they enrolled. The authors introduce the term career preview to describe what the students are missing, a realistic, embedded picture of what professional life as a music graduate actually looks like, provided early in the degree rather than at the end. This concept sits right at the heart of our own research. When you hear from our respondents about their confidence and their concerns, the career preview problem is often exactly what they are circling around, even when they don't name it directly. Source number 2. Bennett's 2016 article is a conceptual piece. She's not collecting new data here, but critically examining how employability is defined and supported in music higher education. Her core argument is that employability in music is poorly defined and often reduced to a list of technical skills, when in reality it also involves what she calls cognitive and professional identity development, the ability to think like a working musician, to adapt, to reflect, and to navigate uncertainty. What makes this land so clearly in the context of our data is a comment from one of our own respondents who said directly that they felt they had learned more from volunteering and guest talks than from their degree. That's not necessarily a criticism of the degree itself, but is a signal that the professional dimension of learning was happening outside the curriculum rather than within it. That is exactly the gap Bennett is naming. Source number 3. What I find particularly valuable about Lopez Iniguez and Bennett's 2021 study is that it moves from diagnosis to action. Rather than just identifying that students lack career preparation, they designed a scaffolded intervention, embedding career development directly into the existing curriculum at a European higher music institution, and tested it with 7 students. The intervention wasn't a bolt-on careers session. It was woven into the teaching. What they found mirrors our own data closely. Students desired work-life balance. They already anticipated managing multiple professional roles, but they also recognized genuine gaps in their own career literacy. They didn't always know how to translate their training into professional action. That self-awareness is actually encouraging. It means students are ready to engage with this support, and they just need institutions to provide it consistently. Source number 4. The most recent of our 4 key sources, and in some ways the most urgent. Berland, Meller, and Bates are writing explicitly in the context of a destabilized music industry. Pandemic disruption, digital transformation, arts funding cuts, and market saturation. Their central concept is the employability ecosystem, the idea that employability in music is not a fixed set of skills you either have or don't have. It's something musicians continuously renegotiate as conditions shift around them. This matters for how we interpret our student data. Several respondents spoke explicitly about structural barriers. One described watching music programs being cut and the market becoming saturated, and said that even though they felt well prepared by their course, they still felt their career prospects were being diminished externally. That's not a skills gap, that's a systemic reality, and Berlin gives us the framework to take it seriously. So let's talk about methodology. The study uses a mixed method design, combining quantitative Likert scale statements with qualitative open-ended questions. In terms of research orientation, the study takes primarily an emic approach, meaning it centers the insider perspective, the lived experience of the participants themselves. An emic approach asks, what does this mean to the people experiencing it? That stands in contrast to an ethic approach, which would impose external frameworks or categories onto the data from the outside. Here, the open-ended questions were written to give respondents space to speak in their own terms, without being channeled into preset answers. The Likert scale provides the structural layer that allows us to identify patterns across the group, but the interpretative weight of the analysis sits firmly with the qualitative responses, what students actually said in their own words. Data were collected through a Google Forms survey distributed during the first week of May 2026 over a 5-day window. 12 responses were received in total from both undergraduate and postgraduate music students at a UK higher education institution. In terms of how participants were selected, this was a convenient sample. The survey was distributed to music students known to the researcher through the institution, so it is not a random or stratified sample. Participants self-selected into the study by choosing to complete the form. Participation was entirely voluntary and anonymous, no names or identifying details were collected. This sampling approach is appropriate for exploratory qualitative research, though it does mean the findings cannot be generalized beyond this group. The aim was depth of insight rather than statistical representativeness. The participant profile is worth pausing on. 5 undergraduates, 7 postgraduates, 6 studying music education, 4 performance, and 2 music business and 1 composition. 7 were already working part-time in music-related roles, and 3 had additional degrees in other fields: marketing, education management, and business. That breadth of background adds richness to the data. The research unfolded in 3 phases. In the first, from March to April, I conducted the literature review, selecting and annotating 12 sources, and designed the survey instrument, making sure the Likert scale items and open questions were directly mapped to the research objectives rather than generic. Phase 2 was data collection. 5 days in early May, 12 completed responses. The timing, close to end-of-year assessments, likely affected how many people responded, but the quality of the open-ended answers was genuinely detailed. Phase 3 was analysis and write-up. Likert scale responses were coded numerically and counted for frequency. Open-ended responses were analyzed thematically. I read through every response, identified recurring ideas, and grouped them into categories. Those categories were then put in conversation with the literature. So here's the headline picture from 12 respondents. Most feel confident about employment, but every single one expects financial instability. Most say they are prepared for a portfolio career, but as we will see, preparation doesn't always mean strategy. Many feel their course lacks meaningful industry connections, and all of them recognize that their music education gives them skills for other fields. That last point is actually one of the more encouraging findings in the data because it tells us the issue isn't about the value of the degree. Students believe in what they are learning. The concern is more specific than that. It's about either the degree translates into professional readiness for a particular and difficult industry. And that's a distinction worth holding onto as we move through the detail. Looking at employment confidence first, the majority of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that they felt confident in their ability to find work after graduation. But that confidence is not evenly distributed. Music education students were the most confident group, and that makes sense. Teaching has a clear vocational pathway, and many are already working toward qualifications that translate directly into employment. Performance students were notably more uncertain. The career paths for performers are genuinely more diffuse, more competitive, and more reliant on a reputation built over time. One respondent flagged something that goes beyond individual confidence entirely: work visa sponsorship restrictions for international workers in music. That's a structural barrier that no amount of career preparation can fully overcome. On degree preparation, students were broadly positive about the quality of their courses, but a consistent theme emerged in the open-ended responses: the gap between academic content and professional life. The call for more placements, more mentoring, more industry access kept appearing, and that quote about learning more from volunteering than from the degree, that wasn't an isolated opinion. It reflects something structural. The starkest findings in the data come when we talk about financial reality and portfolio careers. Every single respondent in some form acknowledged that financial instability is part of the deal when you pursue a music career. That's not pessimism. It reads more like a collective, clear-eyed acceptance of reality. What varies is how people feel about that reality. A significant proportion said they expect to work outside music at least partially to support themselves, and most said they were prepared for portfolio working, holding multiple roles at the same time. But there is an important distinction the data flags. Being psychologically prepared for something is not the same as having a plan for it. Several respondents expressed anxiety, not about the idea of a portfolio career, but about the practical mechanism: how to manage irregular income, how to market yourself, when to take non-music work, and when to hold out. That gap between acceptance of instability and practical strategies for navigating it is one of the clearest action points for institutions that comes out of this research. Responses about institutional career support were among the most polarized in the entire data set. Some students, particularly postgraduates, were strongly positive, describing their institution as actively engaged with their professional development. Others, especially undergraduates in performance, described networking opportunities as either limited or inaccessible. One response that stayed with me flagged the social dimension of music networking, the reliance on events that involve alcohol, late hours, or social settings that not everyone feels comfortable in or able to access. The respondent asked for, in their words, more sober and networking opportunities. It's a small comment, but it points to something real about who gets to build professional relationships in this industry and who gets left out. On transferable skills, the data is consistently optimistic. Almost every respondent said yes, their music education gives them capabilities that extend well beyond the industry. Creativity, discipline, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, project management, communication. One respondent specifically mentioned cultural heritage, content creation, and entrepreneurship as areas where their training had direct crossover. The concern about employment, then, is not about generic capability. It's about the specific structural conditions of the music labor market. So what does all of this add up to? The picture that emerges from these 12 respondents is not one of the students who are naive or overwhelmed. It's a picture of people who are thoughtful, who are aware of the challenges, and who have already started adjusting their expectations, but who are doing so largely without structured support from their institutions. 5 conclusions stand out. First, students are realistic. They are neither blindly optimistic nor defeated by anxiety. Second, there is a consistent and significant gap between what the curriculum provides and what professional life will demand, particularly around industry exposure and practical career skills. Third, financial instability is universally acknowledged and accepted as a feature of music careers, but acceptance is not the same as preparation. Students know it's coming. Many don't have concrete tools for managing it. Fourth, the quality of institutional career support is experienced very unevenly across programs and year groups. Some students feel genuinely well served, and others feel the most useful professional learning happens entirely outside their degree. And fifth, music degrees are broadly seen as developing real transferable value. The problem is not the education itself, it is the bridge between that education and professional life, and right now that bridge is incomplete. The quote in the screen, I think that it captures the core findings of this research better than any statistic can. There are 5 recommendations that emerge from what we have talked until now. First, embed career preview from year 1. Give students a realistic picture of graduate life, including the financial and structural realities from the very beginning of their degrees, rather than as an afterthought at the end. Bennett and Bridgestock showed us in 2015 that students who enter without this picture are at risk of a significant shock at graduation. Second, create inclusive, structured networking opportunities. The data was clear that current networking often happens in social contexts, events, gigs, parties that not everyone can or wants to access. Institutions can and should build alternatives that are professionally focused and genuinely open to all students. Third, increase the presence of industry practitioners within the curriculum, not just as occasional one-off guest speakers, but as integrated contributors, collaborators on projects, mentors within modules, voices in assessment. The students who said they learned more outside their degree were largely talking about contact with working professionals. Fourth, develop dedicated career literacy modules. Freelancing, financial planning for irregular income, self-promotion, how to write a contract, how to build an audience, how to balance creative work with commercial reality. These are not supplementary skills. They are the skills music graduates will use every single week of their working lives. And fifth, explore institutional support for practical qualifications, particularly for music education students who currently have to pursue teaching certification independently. at their own expense, often on top of a full postgraduate workload. If teaching is a realistic and common career pathway, institutions should make it accessible, not incidental. None of these recommendations ask institutions to compromise the artistic heart of what they do. They ask institutions to take professional preparation as seriously as they take artistic development. The full reference list is on screen. All sources are available in the written research document. And that brings us to the end. The students who responded to this survey were generous with their honesty about their hopes, their concerns, and the things they feel their education is and isn't giving them. The aim of this research is to take that honesty seriously and turn it into something useful for the people designing music programs. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.